and welcome. So this is a morning yin, which is an hour-long class, and we're gonna spend some time with these poses. So yin yoga is a little bit slower, a little bit more relaxed. We're aiming for a sensation, so you might call it a stretch sensation, or you might call it a pressure or something like that. It just depends. But we're looking for just kind of a little bit of stress on the system, mostly in the kind of larger area of the body, like the hips, the legs, our low back. Occasionally I'll do some things for the shoulders. The shoulders don't need as long because the connective tissue here isn't in as many layers, right? So when we talk about like the hip, we've got layers of muscle on top of each other, creating layers and layers and layers of fascia. In addition to the parts that hold the muscle onto the bone and all the parts that hold the bones together and the joints themselves. So what we're doing with yin is we're trying to put a little bit of stress on the connective tissue of the body, but we're not trying to make big changes to it. It's a very subtle practice. The idea is sort of like the kind of power that that meandering water has to craft a whole canyon. It doesn't happen overnight. It takes time. And so that's the kind of pressure that we're putting on, very gentle kind of stress on our tissue in the hopes that a couple of different things will occur that will create an opportunity for scar tissue to kind of align itself a little bit more in keeping with the way the muscle works. That will create a sense of hydrating to the tissue, kind of stimulate the production of hyaluronic acid. And there's a layer of fascia under the skin, and then there's a layer of hyaluronic acid. And that is where there's modern meridian theory suggests that the acupuncture meridians are in that layer of hyaluronic acid tissue. And so then, in between muscles, there's hyaluronic acid. So we're just trying to get kind of an increase to that fluid so that the muscle slips around on each other a little bit better, the skin moves over the muscle a little bit better. So that's not something that requires a lot of aggression. And so really the main thing with yin is to be not aggressive. Now, I have a big pillow like this, and I'm going to use this guy. If you don't have something like that, but you've got a couple of throw pillows or even just a blanket, all of those things will work. So we're going to elevate the chest a little bit, and this is where we're going to kind of allow some of this tissue right here on the front of the chest, the front of the shoulder to open up a little. So you'll take your bolster or your pillows and put that down, or you can take a blanket and roll it up and use it the same way. I'm going to use this blanket under my legs. All right. So then we're going to get to the legs in a second. So first, just kind of lay yourself back over the bolster and decide where it should go. Now, usually for me, I like it to line up with about the bottom of my rib cage, right? So my lumbar spine doesn't really have a lot of support under it, but for some people, putting that bolster right up against the sacrum is better. And so you'll have to sort of tweak that on your own. And then I'm gonna take this blanket because we're gonna do this little butterfly shape. So we're gonna put the feet together and let the knees hang open. And you can do that without any support, but sometimes it's a little too spicy. So again, we're going for the least amount of aggression and the most amount of kind of gentle suspension or gentle pressure. So I want just the hint of sensation in the inner thigh and this hint of sensation across the shoulder. So if what I've set myself up with is a little too big, then I want to just make adjustments or change things up. All right, so kind of feeling that out. And making sure that it feels like you've got a little sense of kind of opening here across the front of the shoulder, but not too intense or not too stressful. If you need to put like something under your arms, you can do that. Sometimes it's better if the arms are a little lower, or you might like it better if your arms are up a little higher, so you can experiment with the placement of the arms. And then kind of allow yourself to settle in. So the first minute for me is all just fiddle, 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 right? Get the props just right, get everything lined up. Take a deep breath when you get all that settled, and then relax into it. And then we stay for time. So get yourself positioned, stay a while. And when we come out of the pose, we'll come out nice and slow. We'll do a little movement, and then we'll do the next shape. If along the way, things get too spicy, too intense, like this stretch in your inner thigh becomes too big, then you can change something about it. So you can either add more support or take the legs out of that position, for example. So just kind of monitoring and staying for time. Little tweak here, little tweak there for sure. Those are fine. Now, yin poses in general go anywhere usually between 2 and 5 minutes is pretty average. It can go as long as 20 minutes held in one pose. Generally not less than 2 minutes, but I'm sure there are yin classes out there that have minute-long poses. I've definitely done those myself, with things that are a little bit more akin to a pose where you have to use a lot of support or something, you know, that require your, like kneeling lunges, that kind of thing. Things that are a little bit closer to the other end of the spectrum on the yin versus yang end of the world. But mostly we're doing poses that kind of allow us to sink into the ground and pay attention, right? And so if your mind isn't used to settling, then you have a couple of different places you can try placing the mind. So you can pay attention to the breath. And I like to notice, like, does the breath have an impact on the shape that I'm doing? Like, can I feel the breath at the hip or even at the inner thigh? How does it impact the shoulder situation that I've got going on in this pose? That kind of thing. So it's just, okay, get curious and notice the impact of your breath. So that's the first possibility, is just when you find your mind wandering or getting busy, just bring it back to your breath. And the second possibility is to stay present with sort of the overall sense of being, right? So rather than narrowing the focus in on just the breath, can you allow yourself to sort of broaden the focus out and feel the overall experience of the body, of your breath, of the moment in time that you're in right now? And so essentially what we're doing is just being present for the practice. So it becomes a meditation as opposed to going kind of ticking down those habitual mental pathways of list making or planning or obsessive thinking, that kind of thing. So we're going to stay for about 30 more seconds here. Take a nice big breath, but go with a big sigh, and then I'm just going to bring my knees together at the end of that sigh, right, or with that sigh. And then I'm going to take this blanket out from underneath myself, if I can get it out from underneath the fabric of my pants, and I'm going to pause, leaving my back on this pillow, but if you're ready to come off the pillow or whatever you're on, go ahead and take that out next. I like this little moment here where I can just sort of rock back and forth, and there's still this little cushiness underneath me. Now my feet are pretty close together here, so when I rock my legs back and forth, it takes my pelvis with it. If I take my legs out a little wider, which I'm going to do in a second, then things shift a little bit. So I'm going to let myself roll to one side, take this pillow out, and then I'm coming back onto my back. And then from here, just notice the way the back is now positioned. And so often for me, having something under my back, just feels really nice. And there's kind of a sense that my back stretches out on the floor like a big puddle or a prairie of upper back, stretching out in all directions. And then you can move the arm bones a little bit around in the shoulder socket. Or as we like to call it in the science world, the glenohumeral joint. Just in case you like science. And then we're gonna stretch this whole thing out, okay? So with the body stretched out pretty long, I'm just gonna curl myself into a banana shape. So I'm gonna just stretch over to one side. So the way that this feels now is that my right side is stretching out longer and my left side is curled in, right? All I did really is side flex my spine, and then I slid my legs over to the left as well, which just is a little bit of an adduction to this outer hip, right? And an abduction to this leg. So I've taken this leg away from the midline, brought this leg toward the midline. Now I can do this as well. I could cross this right leg over the left ankle, so that there's a little extra kind of height to this, which as I let this hip get heavy into the floor creates a little bit more sensation on this IT band area of my hip. Now again, IT band is dense connective tissue. It is not going to be forced into length. And so we are not trying to get like, I'm just going to pull on that IT band. Because what happens when we do that with connective tissue is it tears. And then it actually gets tighter. So it's counterproductive, okay? Because then we wind up with scar tissue or swelling or other things. So we want to be super kind about this. So if it feels cool and interesting, awesome. If it feels too spicy, right, back off. Now, sometimes I like to nestle one wrist into the opposite hand. Sometimes I go more for kind of a wider shape with the arms. Today it's feeling nice to kind of get a little wide here. So I'm going to stay with this wider shape. And again, this is the first minute, right? Fiddle with your pose. Play with it. Try to adjust the limbs in different ways. Adjust the spine in different ways. And then let your body relax into the shape. And we'll stay for a couple more minutes just being present and still. Mostly still. So I'm going to stay for one more minute here. And sometimes, things kind of cool off a little bit and I don't feel any sensation in that anymore. And so for the last minute, I might just take it just a notch further into a side bend, for example. So that's a possibility. Sometimes things shift, fluid moves in the body. And we have a little bit more range of motion, especially when the spine is concerned. But you don't have to increase things. They can just stay as they are. We've got this, just a little bit of time left. Come back home to your breath. And take a really big breath. And then with our exhale, we're going to meander our way back. Oh, and just slide back. It's not a big movement, but oh, sometimes it feels really big. So just pause for a moment and rest. Now that you're back into a neutral position with your spine and your legs, and see if there is a difference for you. So for me, it feels like my right side is longer than my left side. Now, if I were to sit and measure them, I don't think that would necessarily be true. Or if it is, it's not dramatic. It feels like my right side is inches longer than my left side. And probably at best it's millimeters. But in any case, sort of noticing. And then in between sides, I love to do either these little windshield wipers or bring the legs in and do more of a little back massage. And I like both. So you could do both or either. Oh. Because sometimes that kind of, movement just puts a little bit of pressure around my sacrum. And so I like this little opportunity to rinse out the sacrum before we do anything more. And again, we don't want to get crazy or aggressive or intense here. We just want it to be the barest hint of movement. So I'm going to move my torso so that my spine feels like it's side bending. And then I'm going to move my legs. And I crossed one ankle over the other last time, so I'm going to do it again. And then I'm going to feel out the arm position that seems best. And this is my minute to sort of get this just right. And sometimes one side's a little more sensitive than the other, so you just do a little bit less or a little bit more, depending on which way that goes. And so once you're there, you just let yourself relax, and we'll stay for a few. So one of the things I love about Yin is that it's not in a hurry, right? We're not going anywhere. we're already where we're going. And so giving ourselves a chance to just deeply relax and pay attention is really nice, really lovely. So again, every time you find your mind kind of wandering off, let's bring it back to either the breath. So the breath is mind training, essentially. And so it helps. It's sort of like when you have a new puppy, you have to train your puppy to walk on the leash and to sit on command and things like that. So breath awareness is mind training in the same way, right? You're training your mind. Oh yeah, come back to the breath. Oh yeah, come back to the breath. So that there's a little bit more time spent in the present moment and a little less time spent inside those little inner chambers of thought that go on. So we've got just a little tiny bit more than 1 more minute left here. And then the other end of that is this kind of open awareness space where you just try to be present for your experience as it is. And that is sort of like the fruit of the labor that you spend paying attention to your breath for however long. Is okay, once you've rooted yourself in presence, can you just expand that out to include your whole experience of being in this pose, in this moment, right? I've got kind of sunlight streaming in through the windows and kind of feeling the little bit of heat from that and the sort of dappled light, and then there's this pose and all this wonderful sensation. And so there's all this stuff that's happening in the present moment that most of the time goes on under the radar screen because there's so much activity in our mind. And so really it's just like stopping to smell the roses, as they say, like stopping to pay attention. So we're going to take one more big breath here. And then we're going to bring ourselves back to the center. And once you get to the center, just for a moment, pause and see how things went. And so my general experience is that now my body halves, my hemispheres are more even, or more symmetrical. Might be the right word. It's not entirely true, but more. More than they were before. All right, so I'm going to do these little windshield wipers. I'm going to do a little bit of a back massage, and then we're going to meet up in a seated position. Now, this is an excellent time because we're going to take about a minute for movement. So it's an excellent time if you want to do some cat-cows in a kneeling position or in a seated position, or if you'd like to throw in a more muscular pose like downward dog, for example, where you're going to put a lot of weight on the bones in your body. You can do that in between poses here with Yin, so that you can kind of, if that helps you feel more balanced, do those things. Oh. Okay. Now, we're going to do a sequence that is very oriented towards the outer hip, right? This little bit inner hip socket, but very focused on this part of our hips. And so if you need to, at any point, you could flip this back over onto your back and take a little bit of the pressure away. I'm going to use a yoga block and a blanket as my props. If you don't have those things, you can stick with whatever pillows or blankets you have if you want props, and if you don't have to use them. Now, I'm going to start with my left leg on top. Now, some people are going to find that it's better if they have their knees stacked up on top of each other. For me, this one is tricky because it makes my pelvis tilt, right? So I've got this sit bone all the way off the floor. So in order to do that one, I either have to elevate my pelvis or I have to change into this shape, which is the one that fits my bones better. And this is called the square pose, okay? So the knees over top of knees in Yin is called shoelace, and you'll know it as the cow face or gomukhsan pose in the other world of yoga. And then this is called square pose because if you look down, your legs make a square in the Yin world, and in the other yoga world, you might know this as fire logs pose, which Yoga Journal likes to use, or you might know it as double pigeon, okay? So that's another name I've seen put out there. Now, another possibility, because some of us, neither of these is going to work. So if you take your block and put it out in front, you can let the shin go out at a different angle, and for some of us, that'll get this squared up position for the thighs. And so that's a possibility. For me, this kind of bony part of my ankle resting on this tender part of my inner thigh is not particularly pleasant. So I like to put the block close, but then I can let my ankle rest on this block. So that's just a little bit better. Now, the issue in this position might be the knee. And so you can put support under either knee. And what you're trying to do is you're trying to support the lower leg bones and the upper leg bone so that the knee doesn't create either a bend or a bowing in the shape. So the blanket goes under both sides so that the knee joint is supported because the bones around it are supported, okay? Now, some people can fold forward in this shape, so far forward, in fact, that they rest their elbows or they're on the floor in front of them. I'm never going to get there. I could rest on top here. You can, if you'd like, you can take your arms behind your back, either in a reverse prayer, or one arm could go up and one arm could go down. And so you can add some shoulder stuff to this. Because we're going to hang out with this pose for a while, your shoulders will tire out, or it'll become tedious in the shoulder joint before we get to the end. So you can certainly do that for part of the pose and then let it go for other parts, all right? So we've settled in. We're gonna stay a while. Along the way, if things change, just add more support or take support away, as the case may be. Now, I find sometimes some stickiness or a little bit of tension just in between the little bones of my foot and then the little toes. Like, my toes like to stick together. So one of the things I take advantage of with this pose is that I can do a little stretch for my feet. So I stick a finger in between each of my toes so that I kind of spread them out. And that gives a little bit of sort of a stretchy sensation to the metatarsals, these bones in my foot, as well as my little phalanges, my little toe joints. And again, it should be subtle, shouldn't be super sharp or prickly. If you've got any sensations that feel like burning, numbness, or tingling, you should shift your pose around a little bit. Try a different version. Notice with this, like sometimes as we increase the spiciness or the intensity of poses, the body will start to tense up. And so if you notice that, that's a good indication that you should back off a little bit. So we're about halfway through here. So we're going to stay for another minute. And you're just noticing, again, if you start to wander off in your brain, come back to the breath or come back to the pose itself. Take a big breath. Let go with a big and we're gonna lift ourselves up out of here on an inhale. Lean back. Notice which leg is on top, okay? In this case, it's my left leg. And so that leg's gonna become important in a second. But before I get there, I'm gonna pause, stretch both legs out, and give them a little movement. Now, that left leg is going to be the one that goes behind me in the deer pose. So I'm taking this leg back out to the side like this. And there's about a 90-degree angle here. And then my front thigh and my back thigh are about 90 degrees apart. Again, no one's getting out a protractor. It's like whatever is in that general ballpark. If you need this leg to be a little higher in order for your hip joint not to tell you stories, then put your leg a little higher. Now, the tendency for me is, because of the internal rotation here, is it pushes my pelvis, so that's where my torso really wants to stay, is leaning this direction. So you can do that. You can lean out to the side. You can come forward a little bit if you want to. Leave the legs in this position, but you can adjust your upper body. Sometimes I like to add a little turn to this, turning one way or the other. My favorite thing is to build a little armrest with some yoga props so that I can just kind of lean into that a little and relax as deeply as possible through the legs. So I don't get any sort of real spicy, stretchy sensation in this pose. What I do get is a kind of change in this sort of front and pocket of my hip, right? I feel a kind of interesting sensation in my hip. It doesn't feel sharp or shooting. There's no numbness, burning, or tingling. It actually doesn't feel unpleasant. It's just different, right? So there's a little, I don't sit like this very often. So there's a little bit, it's just weird. It's a little weird. That does not bother me. If I get any sensations of real discomfort or anything that feels like a binding or a pinching, I definitely change positions, okay? What is interesting to me about this is that it is, when I let this go, the sense in my hip is that there's kind of a spaciousness or a feeling of real comfort is the word that's coming to my mind, but that's not exactly what I mean. But in any case, it feels very comforting or very soothing to the my hip in general. Not necessarily now, but when I let the shape go, right on. All right, so we're gonna stay here for just a little over 1 more minute. Just come back home to your breath. We just have a few more in this shape. So take a nice big inhale. Let go with a big, and we're gonna lean away from this hip, right? And we're gonna let this leg for just a second, we're just gonna let it come around to the front, give it a little movement. This is where we're gonna find out, like, was this a good idea? Was this good medicine for me? And then noticing how that feels. Now this is gonna turn into the swan pose, okay? So I've gotta turn a little bit sideways because I don't have as much room behind me. And then that leg is gonna extend back. Now, this pose can be a little bit spicy. And so again, you can flip this guy up over onto your back if you like. I like to put a pillow underneath my hip or a folded blanket. And then I like to spend part of the pose in a more upright position because it's a little bit more of a back bend and I get that action. And then some of the pose I'm gonna spend closer to the ground so that my spine is a little more neutral with the pelvis, okay? So I'm gonna start a little more neutral and end a little more back bendy. And again, like you're noticing the sensations. Does anything feel sharp or shooting? Usually your nervous system jerks you right out of those. But the more subtle sensations that are tricky are a burning sensation, especially in the hip itself or in the joint itself. Anything that feels like numbness or tingling. Sometimes when I lean forward, I put pressure on an inner thigh nerve and my foot will go a little numb. And so if that happens, I sit up, take that pressure away, see if that helps. If it doesn't, then I come out of the pose, right on? And you can flip this pose upside down and just hang out with your leg kind of close to your chest. Like this leg, just turn it upside down, turn that leg up close to your chest. It will work. And for some of us, that's the better way to go. Oh. we're about halfway through. And so it's a good opportunity for you to check back in, make sure that you like what's happening, and that you want to stay in this shape. You may want to change it up a little. Again, you can come back home to the breath. With kind of the overall, like just notice the overall sensation of being in this shape. See if you can get a sense of how your nervous system feels about it. And sometimes I know because my face tightens up and that my nervous system is worried about me. In our last minute here. Or this could be the minute you come out and do some movement. That's okay too. Use just a few more breaths. So take a nice big inhale, and then you're going to exhale and just lean a little bit and unwind this pose. Now, we're going to come back to just laying on our back position to rinse this whole thing out. And we won't stay for a long time, but we're going to stay for maybe a minute or two, just kind of giving ourselves a little chance to see what happened. So I like to start with this sort of thing, a little movement. And then I'm going to just jiggle my legs a little further out. I'm going for straight, but I'm going to get there slowly. And then when I get all the way to straight, I'm going to do just a little bit more movement and then just relax, right? Because I just did a bunch of stuff asymmetrically. So I had one leg in front, one leg behind, one leg under. I haven't on the other side. And I like this moment to just notice how things feel and whether the overall sense is that what I just did was good for me. Or if there's anything that feels achy or sore. Because those are places I'm going to pay attention to. Right on. And your body will tell you the story. Sometimes, for me, I have a pretty high tolerance for discomfort. So I can be in a pose and not realize that it's problematic. So I know that about myself. So I've become even more gentle over the years of doing yin. But this is where the rubber meets the road in a way. Your body's not going to lie to you when you're like this, right? So if things feel sore, that's the way it is, right? And you may not have realized it, but now you do. So the other thing that could happen is that everything feels lighter and a little lifted, or a little bit bubbly, or a little bit interesting. And so those are usually sensations that I find pleasant. And so when I have that sort of lightness of sense, or that sense of kind of my body is a little more relaxed, then I take that as like, okay, let's try it again, do the other side the same way. So now we're going to kind of pull ourselves together, and we're going to come up and do the other side, and armed with this knowledge of how our body responded, we can add some extra choices to this, right? So when I get to the poses, I might throw in more support if I found that things were a little bit tricky, or the same amount of support if everything felt really nice. All right, and sides are not the same, right? We might have one hip that's tighter than the other. When I sit cross-legged this way, my left leg does not get as close to the ground as my right leg does. So I might want a little more support for that reason. All right, so I'm going to put my right leg up on top. And again, I'm going to use the block, but you could not use the block. And I'm going to employ a little bit of structural support here just to keep all of the body parts supported in such a way that it feels like there's a structure that's, I'm not getting any unusual pressure in the joints of my knees or the joints of my hips. Right on? And then we'll find ourselves, so you do that little finagle, move things around, and then settle in, and we'll stay a while. And if you can get more or less still, get more or less still, right? Because that's a nice quality to the yin practice, is the opportunity to really marinate and settle and meditate. But I often will kind of like lean a little this way, lean a little that way, make these really subtle little movements just for the purpose of a kind of present moment awareness, checking out how my body is accepting various shapes and layers of tension that I might have been carrying that I didn't notice until now. And what is it like to let those go, right? Just becoming really intimate with my own experience. So we're just past that halfway mark. Just notice where you're landed. If there was some tension or something like that, you can let that go. I'm about ready to let my little toes go and spend the last minute here just getting a little bit softer, maybe even backing off a little bit or surfing in a little bit, depending on your experience. We're getting there. We got 2 more breaths. So you're going to take a really big inhale. Let go with a big and then we're going to inhale our way back. And this is my right leg, so I'm going to remember that that's the one that's going to go backwards. But before we get there, take a moment to undo everything and give everything a bit of a rinse. Okay, so the right leg is going to go behind us for the deer shape, and you might decide to put in some props of some sort, whether it's blankets or some props. I'm going to use these blocks in just a second. Create a little structure for myself to lean into. It feels like a throne. It's kind of nice. And then, you know, just feeling out this angle, should the leg be further back or further forward, just so it feels a little more natural for you. Natural may not be the word you would use to describe this shape. It technically is a movement the hip is, you know, capable of generating. But it's not something we do regularly, for sure. Oh. Again, kind of as you're here, I like to let some silence happen, but just to remind you to come back home to your breath, or to kind of the overall shape of the pose, or, you know, we're coming up on our halfway mark. So it's a good moment to check back in and see, like, should I adjust things? Am I, you know, am I feeling like I'm tensing up? Maybe I want just a little bit of a turn, you know, or a little bit of a forward bend here. So you can add those little extras. Last minute go. So we're going to take a nice big breath. And then kind of leaning away from this, we're going to bring that leg around for a moment. Just give it a little shimmy. Now, again, this is going to turn into the swan, and I'm going to go this direction this time. And this leg that was up front is still going to be up front, right? So I'm just going to slide that leg all the way around behind me. And again, it might be that you can add a couple props to your life to make this pose a little more approachable. You might flip this pose all the way upside down. Start there. And the angle of your shin and your thigh are really up to you. Some people need more room for their knee or their hip joint. You might need less. So this might be time to kind of change things up or just notice the breath again. In the event you went into some little la-la land in your head. Notice your breath. Be present for your last minute here. Or maybe this is the minute that you get out of this pose because you've had enough, and that's okay too. Take a really big breath, yogis. And then as you exhale, you can lean into that front leg hip and then bring that back leg around. And we'll pause for a moment before we stretch out. And just, do a little movement. It feels nice. So, what we have left to do is Shavasana. And so I'm going to kind of set myself up with Shavasana in this particular way. So I am going to use my big pillow under my legs, and I'm going to use my blanket under my head, okay? Now, for me, I have a little, I have a little knobby ridge on the back of my skull. So a little bit of a softer surface under the head is really nice. But mostly my head lays level. So I don't want so much underneath me that my chin tucks in. I want to try to get my, when I'm kind of sitting upright, my chin is level. I want kind of that same thing in the on the back of my head. So I'm going to fold my blanket so that I have kind of a nice big rectangle. And then this little folded edge, right? I've got an edge here where all the little loose ends are. And then I've got an edge where there's a nice fold. And that's the part I want to put under my neck, okay? So I'm going to put that nice fold so that can go under, and then all the rest of this is loose and it's above my head. So then the bolster, or whatever pillows you've got, if you want to use the same idea, I'm going to hold that up against the edge of my thigh with my feet here, and then I'm going to wind up getting myself positioned. So I'm going to adjust my blanket so that there's a little nice softness under my head, and just the littlest, I'm going to take this little edge of the blanket and I'm going to cup it around the back of the little ridges right here on the back of my skull. Just so those little ridges have this little sense of having a little pillow of support under them. And for some reason that lets my nervous system relax. I'm not totally clear on the mechanism of it, but there does seem to be some nervous system response to having just the kindest little bit of support here. Now again, if it's too much and my head's out of alignment, then I don't actually calm the nervous system. So I want my head to be in kind of the most neutral alignment possible. And then you're going to adjust the positioning under your legs so that that feels like it helps relax your low back and your hips. And then just let your body stretch out. We'll spend a few minutes here just letting ourselves relax. You need a little bit of movement first, like you could feel that little bit of I just need to move for a second. Move. And then come back to this. For some people, Shavasana is the hardest pose. This pose being really vulnerable, laying on the floor, everything relatively exposed. It's pretty crazy, right? But we're here, breathing, and doing our best. take a moment, just notice your breath. And take a breath all the way down to the tips of your toes. Let it go with a big sigh. And then wiggle your fingers and toes. And stretch them out. Oh, and squeeze them in and stretch them out. Oh, and then do the wrist and ankle some. Give yourself a big full body stretch. Oh. And then you can rock yourself up if you want to, but I like to take everything a little on the slow side. So I'm gonna take my pillow here and I'm just gonna roll onto my side. Use it as a little structure of support. Take a moment, kind of re-enter the regular world. And then you can push yourself up. And we'll take a nice big breath together. So take a nice big inhale. And a big one more big sigh. And then enjoy the rest of your day. Namaste, yogis.